Steelhead Falls. Greetings on a journey. Today's a little bit longer, but it's a Monday, so stick with me a little bit on this one. The story before us, the reason it's a little bit longer is that the story before us is a fascinating story. It's a story of a man who had been ill for 38 years, if you can believe that, at a pool at Bethsaida. 38 is not a number that's used very often in the Bible. It's usually numbers like 40, which signify a long time. But 38 years is a long time of helplessness and hopelessness. You can't seem to grow through it. His sickness was an illness that he didn't want, and you know, you pray and you pray and you pray and you hope, but you just can't break through. So this guy was full of helplessness and hopelessness all of those years. If God would have done it, maybe he would have figured God would have done it by now, by 38 years. But he didn't quit going back to that pool at Bethsaida. He kept going again and again. Now he's been lying in that place for 38 years, kind of like the woman a little earlier who had the flow of blood for 12 years. And it was on this day when people went to get healed, they waited for the angel to stir the waters, because when there's stirring waters like behind me, there's something that's gonna happen. He's lying there, and all of a sudden Jesus comes along. It was during one of those feasts that brought Jesus to Jerusalem, and Jesus goes right to the place, the pool at Bethsaida, and he says to this guy, "Do you want to be made well?" Excuse me, do you want to be made well? It's kind of one of the biggest, well, yes, Jesus, questions in the Bible. But there's some interesting words leading up to that. Notice the words, he went in and Jesus saw him. Jesus saw this man who had been lying there for 38 years amidst all of that mass of humanity, of sickness, all of them crying out to be healed, and Jesus saw him. In a sense, Jesus sees one person at a time. His scope is sometimes limited and focused. His scope is sometimes for that one person who needs it in a dramatic way. Jesus could have said, "Hey y'all, you're healed," and they would have been healed, but Jesus saw him as an individual, maybe meaning that Jesus sees us as individuals, as people specifically who need healing. And so the second part of that, he saw him and he knew him. Note that he knew him, he knew his condition, he knew what he was facing, he probably knew that he had been there for a long time. Maybe it's important to realize the importance of that word, he knew him. He saw his condition, he knew him, he knew that he was unique, maybe like he knows we're unique, each one of us, children of God, knowing our condition. And then what happened is something that was really opening things up, what was spectacular. Jesus says, "Do you want to be healed?" Kind of one of those beyond questions. Yes, of course he wants to be healed, but Jesus asks him anyway. That's the whole methodology for deepening discipleship. What happened then changed this man's life. Jesus said, "Do you want to be made well?" Now think about that question, because if you think about it, sometimes people don't want to become well. When Jesus asked the guy this question, "Do you want to be made well?" there was the possibility that the answer would have come back negative. "No, I don't want to. I mean, I'm afraid of that change. I'm comfortable in my illness. My relationship can't get better, so I don't want to get well. I'll just put up with it. I don't want to go through the hassle of what it means to be healed. I don't want to go through all the work and counseling to make a relationship better. I don't want to be healed." It's kind of like that little kid who sits in his poopy diapers and says to himself, "You know, I know it stinks, but it's warm and it's mine." Do you want to be made well? Do you want to do the hard work that it takes to be made well? Interesting what happens. The man says, "Yeah, I want to be made well," but he says, when the Spirit stirs up the water, there's nobody to help me in. Notice his answer, because the man was focused on his solution to his problem. His solution. Nobody brings me in when the water is being healed up. Rather than focusing on his solution, he focused, rather than focusing on God's solution, he focused on his solution. Now, the devotion today, you read about Susan, who was a hopeless alcoholic who hit bottom and then started digging. In her disease of alcoholism, if you would have asked her, do you want to be made well? She would have said, well, yeah. But her getting well solution would have been to continue drinking and without having anybody bother her. She wanted to continue her path, as people in addiction often do, but without consequences. I want to get well on my own terms is probably what Susan would have said. The guy at the pool wanted to get well on his own terms. Susan wanted to do her own way of fixing her solution. But Jesus challenges us to do the very thing that we think we can't do. I can't change, I can't do that. There's no hope, it's impossible, and it just isn't going to happen. Jesus says to the man, rise, take up your pallet and walk. Jesus says, Abraham, you're going to have a kid. Jesus says, Moses, stretch out your hand. He says, Joshua fit the battle of Jericho. He says to the guy who's been lying there for 38 years, dude, take up your pallet and walk. You want to be made well. You want to do the hard work that it takes to be made well. You want to take this journey with Jesus and draw closer to him. Do you want to be made well? See you tomorrow.